Hey, welcome to X-Oriente, the new voice of brotherhood. I am half of your host tonight, Eric Diamond,
I'm the other half of that host, Jason Van Dyke.
and tonight we've got kind of something interesting. So normally we don't really do history on the show, and the reason for that was that when we started Low these many years ago, everybody talked about Masonic history. Like, every Masonic journal pretty much talks about Masonic history. It's history, 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 and nothing but. And the mission of the show is really to focus on sort of the ideas of the fraternity and the future of the fraternity. But every once in a while, something turns up that um, I don't know. It kind of does both. It's historical in nature, but it really kind of informs, um, uh, you know. Hang on a second. I'm having some technical issue. It informs like what's going on today,
hmm
and and that's the case with this particular thing. So what this is, I was kind of researching this because I was reading a paper by Margaret Jacobs, which we'll talk about on another show. Um, and she referenced this thing called Lessing's Ernst and Falk Dialogues for Freemasons, and it was a when did it come out?
This is, I don't know. I don't remember.
It was like 17. I want to say
Yeah,
something
I was
like
going to say 18th century.
yeah, it's definitely 18th century.
And I want to say
Um,
mid 18th. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 1780 ish
yeah, that sounds
is
about right.
where we're at. Yep.
Yeah, 1780s ish. And so Lessing was a German writer. He was a philosopher, and like many of the classical philosophy works, the this particular piece is in the form of a dialogue, a series of dialogues between two people. What struck me early on about this was that it was, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot, Jason, is sort of the purpose, like Masonry finding its purpose in the world,
hmm
right?
hmm
And what was really interesting about reading this particular piece of writing is that they were debating the same things back in the 18 or 1780s, and kind of really sort of struggling with who are we and what are we and what should we be. Um,
hmm
and so we thought it would be. I mean, let me ask you: do you have any like initial impressions of this before we get into it?
um, not anything that where you're not going right with this,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say to back up just a little bit is that um, what a dialogue is, what's going to happen tonight, is a little different. And for those of you who didn't take a philosophy course in college, this is going to be really different for you. But essentially what's going on is that philosophers for a really long time have utilized basically a play, and they call it a dialogue, and it's usually with two people going back and forth talking to each other, right? And they use that device to suss out their ideas, to actually have an argument with themselves. And they've used it for a really long time, and they still do. Actually, people still write dialogues like this. Actually, they've done this since Socrates.
I mean, most of the
Um,
Zohar is written as a dialogue,
yeah, right.
right?
Sure, absolutely. And so when I say a long time, I mean a really
Long
long
time.
time,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And it's just a really effective way of um, of getting to the heart of philosophy. And philosophy is in itself about an argument, right? You're making an argument in philosophy, and the only way to do that is through a dialogue. And so the writers do a dialogue. Um, so that's my kind of my little intro to this. But what we're going to do tonight, we're gonna actually read these old 1780s dialogues, and
Yeah.
we're going to do them with dramatic flair.
With dramatic flair. This is X-Oriente Radio Playhouse Theater.
That's correct.
And
I'm so excited.
And so
I have. By the way, and just knowing us, I have my dialogue up on a screen over here, but I also have it on my phone just in case because I know it's going to screw up at some point. So I've come prepared.
Not. So
I know.
yeah,
I'm just saying. I come
we're
prepared.
no, it's cool. It's good. It's all good. So we're gonna read this. Do kind of a table reading of it. And then probably, I'm not entirely sure how long it's going to take.
I don't know either. You know, what I think there's 3 of these, 4 of these,
5, I think.
5 of these. Badly underestimated. All right. Well,
here's the thing. Maybe there's 3. Yeah, we'll see.
Do we want to? Do you know what we could do is and I love how we're doing this right now, but I think it would be really fun. Do you want to do them? Do you want to do them straight fire, or do you want to do them one at a time? Talk about what we just did after we do one, or do we want to do straight fire through and then go back and talk about them?
Let's do.
I say because we got an hour ish.
Yeah.
So let's do one at a time and let's see where we get with these. And I think then if we do one at a time, it's fresh in your head, right?
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And so
Fair
then
enough.
we can kind of wrestle with some concepts.
It doesn't really get really good till dialogue 3, but that's okay.
Well, no, you're right. No, you're right. You're right.
Dialogue 3 starts getting really juicy.
Yeah, it does. I'm fine with that. Do you want to just bolt through to 3?
Yeah, let's do that because then we can kind of take it apart.
Done. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. Cool.
Okay.
All right,
sorry. Go ahead.
No. Please go. Go. You're gonna explain who these people are.
Yeah. So these are 2 people. These 2 guys, Ernst and Falk. I will be playing the role of Falk, and
I will be playing the role of Ernst.
Ernst.
Correct.
And they're basically kind of just having conversations. So some of this stuff kind of sets up the conversation, but you'll see what I mean. They
Right.
kind of get into it pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first conversation.
Right. Hold on. Got to get into my space. All right. Here we go. What are you thinking about, friend?
Nothing.
Oh, you're so quiet.
Who thinks when he is enjoying himself? And I am enjoying the lovely morning. So,
Well, you're quite right.
if I were thinking about something, I'd be talking. No pleasure compares with that of thinking out loud with a friend.
I agree.
If you've had your fill of taking in the fine morning, why don't you talk if something occurs to you?
I've been meaning to ask you something actually for a long time.
Ask away.
Is it true, friend, that you're a Freemason?
That's the question of one who's not a Mason.
Admittedly. But give me a straight answer. Are you a Freemason?
I believe myself to be one.
Well, that's an answer of one who doesn't quite feel sure of himself.
Oh, but I am.
Then you must know whether, when, where, and through whom you became accepted.
I know these things, but they don't count for much.
They don't?
Who doesn't accept and who isn't accepted?
What do you mean?
I believe that I'm a Freemason, not because older Masons have accepted me into an official lodge, but because I understand and appreciate what and why Freemasonry is, when and where it has existed, what fosters and what hinders it.
Nevertheless, you speak in such hesitant tones. I believe myself to be one?
I've grown accustomed to that tone, not because of lack of conviction, but because I don't want to stand in anybody's way.
You answer me as though I were a stranger.
Stranger or friend.
You were accepted. You know everything?
Others, too, have been accepted and believe they know.
But could you have been accepted without knowing what you know?
Yes, unfortunately.
How?
Because men who accept others do not themselves know it, while the few who do cannot say it.
But could you know what you know without having been accepted?
Why not? Freemasonry isn't an arbitrary thing, a superfluity, but a necessity grounded in the nature of man and of civil society. Consequently, one must be just as capable of coming upon it through one's own reflection as under external guidance.
Freemasonry isn't anything arbitrary. Doesn't it involve words and symbols and customs, every one of which might have been different? Mustn't it consequently be arbitrary?
Sure. But those words, these symbols, these customs do not constitute Freemasonry.
Freemasonry is a necessity? How then did people manage before Freemasonry came on the scene?
Freemasonry has always existed.
Well, then tell me, what is this necessary, this indispensable Freemasonry?
As I indicated earlier, something of which even those who know it cannot speak.
A nonentity, then.
Don't be hasty.
What I understand, I can put into words.
Not always, and not often in such a way that the words convey to others the idea I have exactly.
Approximately, if not exactly.
Approximately the same idea would be useless or even dangerous here, unless if it conveys less than the idea, dangerous if it holds the least little bit more.
Odd. If even the Freemasons who know the secret of their order cannot impart it verbally, how then do they spread their order?
By deeds. They allow good men and youths whom they deem worthy of more intimate association to surmise, guess at, see their deeds, as much of them as visible. The Masons' new intimates find these deeds to their liking and do the same.
Deeds? Deeds done by Freemasons? I only know of their speeches and songs, more prettily printed normally than they are thought or recited.
As might be said of lots of other songs and speeches.
Or am I supposed to take these things they boast of in these songs as their deeds?
If they aren't just boasting?
What are they boasting about anyway? Nothing beyond what is expected of every good human being and decent citizen. That they're so friendly, so charitable, so obedient, so patriotic.
Are these virtues nothing?
Nothing that would distinguish the Masons from the rest of mankind. Who isn't supposed to be friendly, charitable, and the rest?
Supposed to be.
Aren't there plenty of incentives and opportunities for such virtue apart from Masonry?
Yes, but the Masonic Fellowship gives men an additional incentive.
What is the good of multiplying incentives? Better to strengthen one to the utmost. A multitude of motives is like a multitude of gears in a machine. The more gears, the more slips.
I can't deny it.
Besides, what sort of additional incentive is this that belittles all others, casts doubt on them, and gives itself out as the strongest and the best?
Friend, be fair. Don't judge by the exaggerations and confusions of idle songs and speeches. They're the work of apprentices, callowed disciples.
You mean Brother Speaker was talking nonsense?
I mean, the things that Brother Speaker was praising the Freemasons for are obviously not their deeds, since, whatever else you might say of him, he doesn't talk out of school and the deeds speak for themselves.
I'm beginning to see what you're driving at. Why didn't they occur to me sooner, these deeds, these telling, those deeds, those telling? I'd almost call them shouting deeds. Freemasons don't merely support one another, and powerfully so, as with the members of any association. They work for the public good of whatever state they're members of.
For instance, I want to be sure you're on the right track.
For instance, the Freemasons of Stockholm. Didn't they establish a founding hospital?
I hope that the Freemasons of Stockholm showed their mettle at other occasions.
What other occasions?
Just others.
And the Freemasons of Dresden, who employ poor young girls as lace makers and embroiderers to bring down the size of the foundling hospital?
Ernst, need I remind you of your name? Be serious.
Seriously, consider the Freemasons of Brunswick, who provide poor boys of talent with drawing lessons.
What's wrong with that?
Or the Freemasons of Berlin, who support Basdau's Philanthropen.
The Masons support Basdau's Teacher Training Institute. Who told you that fable?
It was all over the newspaper.
You read it in the newspaper? I won't believe it until I see Basdau's handwritten receipt. And I'd want to be sure that it was made out to the Freemasons, not to just some Freemasons in Berlin.
Why, don't you approve of Basdau's Institute?
Me? I approve wholeheartedly.
Then you won't begrudge him of such financial assistance.
Begrudge? Quite the contrary. Who is a stronger well-wisher of Basdau than I?
Well then, you're becoming incomprehensible.
Yeah, I suppose so. Anyway, I was unfair. Even Freemasons may undertake something, albeit not as Freemasons.
Does that hold for the rest of their good deeds as well?
Perhaps. Perhaps all the good deeds that you mentioned to me just now are, to use scholastic jargon for brevity's sake, their deeds ad extra.
How do you mean that?
Perhaps they are the eye-catching things that they do to draw the multitude's attention, to which they do solely for this reason.
To gain respect and toleration?
Could be.
What about their deeds then? You keep silent?
Perhaps I've already answered you. Their real deeds are their secret.
Yet another one of those things that can't be put into words.
Not very well, but I can and am permitted to tell you this much. The Freemasons' real deeds are so great and of such long range that centuries may pass before it can be said this was their doing. Yet they have done everything good in the world, note well, in the world. And they continue to work for all the good that is to be in the world, note well, in the world.
Come now, you're pulling my leg.
Indeed not. But look, there goes a butterfly that I must have. It's a monarch. I want to be off, so I'll quickly tell you just one more thing. The true deeds of the Freemasons aim at making most of the deeds commonly called good superfluous.
But these, the Freemasons' true deeds, are themselves good?
None better. Think about that for a bit. I'll be right back.
Good deeds whose object is to make good deeds superfluous. That's a riddle. Refuse to guess at riddles. I'd rather stretch out beneath this tree and watch the ants.
So that's the first dialogue.
And scene.
And scene. The second dialogue.
What's been keeping you? Did you catch your butterfly after all?
It lured me from bush to bush, down to the brook. Suddenly, it was on the other side.
There are such seducers.
Have you thought it over?
What, your riddle? I won't catch my butterfly either, but I shan't worry about mine from now on. I tried once to talk to you about Freemasonry. That's enough. You're obviously just like the rest of them.
The rest of them? They don't say the things that I say.
They don't? So there are heretics among the Masons too? And you are one of them? But heretics always have something in common with the Orthodox. And that's what I meant.
What did you mean?
Orthodox are heretical. Freemasons all play with words, provoke questions, and then answer without really answering.
Is that so? Well then, let's talk about something else, since you tore me away from my pleasant condition of mute
Staunen. Nothing is easier than getting you back into that condition. Just lie down beside me and look.
At what?
At the life and activity in and around and on top of this ant heap. Such busyness and such order. Every one of them fetches and carries and pushes, and yet none is in the other's way. Look, they even help each other.
Ants live in society just like bees.
And theirs is a society more wonderful than the bees, because there is none in their midst to bind them together or to rule over them.
Order can exist even without government?
If every individual knows how to rule himself, why not?
I wonder whether human beings will ever reach that stage.
Hardly.
What a shame.
Indeed.
Get up. Let's go. They're going to crawl all over you. I mean the ants. I want to ask you something. I don't know your opinion on this at all.
On what?
Civil society, for human beings in general. How do you size it up?
As a great, good thing.
No doubt. But do you consider it a means or an end?
I don't follow.
Do you think that men were made for the state, or rather states for men?
Some, it seems, want to maintain the former, but the latter is probably truer.
I think so too. States unite human beings in order that, through and in these associations, every individual human being may better and more securely enjoy his share of happiness. The totality of the shares of happiness of the members is the happiness of the state. Apart from this, there is no happiness. Every other so-called happiness of the state, for the sake of which some of the members, no matter how few, are said to have to suffer, is a mere cover-up for tyranny.
I would rather not say that so loud.
Why?
Truth, which each construes according to his own situation, is easily abused.
Do you realize, friend, that you're already a demi-Freemason?
Who, me?
Yeah, since you admit that there are truths better not spoken.
Yes, but they could be spoken.
The sage is unable to say the things he better leave unsaid.
As you wish. Let's not get back onto the Freemasons. I don't want to know more about them anyway.
I beg your pardon, but at least you see that I'm willing to tell you more about them.
You're making fun of me. All right. Civil society and political organization, or whatever sort, are mere means to human happiness. What follows?
Means only, and means of human devising, though I won't deny that nature's arranged things in such a way that men would have to invent political organization sooner or later.
Which is why some have held that civil society is a natural end, because everything, our passions and our needs, leads there. They believed that civil society and the state are ultimate ends of nature, as though natural teleology didn't bear on the production of means, and as though nature were more interested in the happiness of abstractions like state, fatherland, and such, than the happiness of flesh and blood of individuals.
Fine, you're meeting me halfway. The next thing I want to ask you is this. Admitting that political constitutions are means and means of human invention, would you say that they alone are exempt from the vicissitudes of human means?
What do you even mind when you speak of the vicissitudes of human means?
What makes them different from divine, infallible means?
Namely?
That they're not infallible. Worse than being ineffectual, they often produce clean contrary to their designs.
Give me an example if you can think of one.
Ships and navigations are means toward distant lands, but they are also to blame for many a man's never arriving there.
Those who suffer shipwreck and drown? I see what you're driving at, but the reasons for a constitution's failure, why it cheats so many individuals of their happiness, are known. There are many types of constitution, one better than the next, some very inadequate, blatantly at odds with their purpose. The best may yet be discovered.
Forget about that. Suppose the very best constitution imaginable were invented. Suppose everybody in the world over had accepted it. Don't you think that even then, under this best constitution, things are extremely disadvantageous to human happiness would necessarily occur, things of which men in the state of nature would have been utterly ignorant?
If such things occur under the supposedly best constitution, I infer it isn't the best after all.
Assuming that a better one is possible? Well, take that better one and repeat the question.
You seem to me to be disguising with spurious subtlety that you assume all along that every instrument of human invention, including political constitutions, must be flawed.
I'm not just assuming it.
Show me.
You want examples of the harm that comes necessarily of even the best constitution? I can mention 10 at least.
Well, one will do for start.
We're supposing that the best constitution has been invented and that all mankind live under it. Does that imply that all human beings in the world make up one single state?
Hardly. Such an immense state would be ungovernable. So it would have to be divided into many smaller states, all governed with the same laws.
People would still be Germans and Frenchmen, Dutchmen and Spaniards, Russians and Swedes, or whatever they happen to be called?
Certainly.
Wouldn't each of these states have its own interests, and the members of each state have the interests of whatever state happens to be theirs?
Obviously.
These state interests would often clash, wouldn't they? Just as they do now. So wouldn't the citizens of two different states be just as unable to encounter one another without a burden of prejudice and suspicion if they lived under the best imaginable constitution as a German and as a Frenchman, or a Frenchman and an Englishman today?
Very probably.
When a German meets a Frenchman or a Frenchman and Englishman, he does not meet him simply as a human being, a fellow man to whom he is drawn because of their shared nature. They meet as German and French, French and English. Aware of these national differences, they are cold, distant, suspicious, even before they have had any personal dealings.
Well, you're right, unfortunately.
Doesn't that prove that the means for uniting human beings, for assuring their happiness through association, also divide them?
I suppose so.
One step further, these several states, many of them, will have climates that are very different. Consequently, they'll have quite different needs and satisfactions. Consequently, they'll have different moral codes. Consequently, different religions, don't you think?
Well, that's an enormous step.
Wouldn't people still be Jews and Christians and Muslims and such?
I don't dare deny it.
In that case, Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike will continue to deal with each other as before, not as one human being with another, but as a Christian with a Jew with a Muslim. Each will claim that men of his type are spiritually superior to men of other types, and they will thus lay the foundation for rights that natural man could not possibly claim to be possessed of.
It's very sad, but what you say is probably quite true.
Only probably true?
I would think that just as you supposed all the world's states to have one constitution politically, so one ought to suppose of them one religion. I can't imagine how they could be in the same politically without religious uniformity.
Me either. Anyway, I propose the hypothesis of one of the best political constitution only to prevent your evading the issue of the possibility or impossibility of a perfect constitution. Political and religious uniformity the world over are equally impossible. The steps of our argument were one state, several states, several states, several political constitutions, several political constitutions, several religions.
Yes, that's how things look.
That's how they are. Consider the next second misfortune which civil society, quite at odds with its end, gives rise to. Civil society cannot unite men without dividing them, nor divide them without erecting walls or digging ditches to keep them apart.
Those chasms are so dreadful, those walls often so impossible to climb.
I must add a third. Civil society doesn't just divide human beings along national and religious lines. Such division into some few major parts of each, which would for itself be a whole, were surely better than no whole whatever. But civil society divides on and on, within each partial whole.
Explain.
Do you believe that a state without differentiation of social classes is conceivable? Let it be a good state or a bad state, closer or further from perfection, it is impossible for all of its citizens to share the same political, social, and economic conditions. Even if they all participate in legislative activity, they cannot all have an equal share of it, share in it, at least not an equal direct share. So there are going to be upper and lower classes. And supposing that originally each citizen got an equal share in the state's wealth, this distribution cannot be expected to last beyond a mere 2 generations. One man will know better than another how to increase his property, or a poorly administered estate may need to be shared out among more heirs than a well-administered one. Soon there are bound to be rich and poor.
Evidently.
Consider now there are many evils that are not due to such social differentiation.
If only I could contradict you. But why do I want to anyway? To unite human beings, one must divide them and keep them divided. Granted, that's how it is. It can't be otherwise.
That precisely is my thesis.
But what's the point of dwelling on this conclusion? Are you trying to make civil society hateful to me? Do you want me to regret that people ever conceived the idea of uniting into states?
Do you know me so little? If only the good gained from civil society were that human reason can be cultivated there, and there alone, I would bless it, even if the evils it produced were greater by far than the ones mentioned.
As the proverb has it, if you want to enjoy the fire, you must expect to put up with the smoke.
Quite. But granting that the fire makes the smoke unavoidable, should one therefore prohibit the invention of chimneys? If the fellow who invented them to be called an enemy of fire? You see, that's what I was after.
What? I don't follow you.
And yet the image was most suitable. If human beings cannot be united into states apart from such divisions as we spoke of, does that make the divisions good?
Why, no.
Does that make them sacred?
How do you mean that's sacred?
I mean, so that touching them ought to be prohibited.
Touching with what end in view?
This, of not letting them gain more ground than is absolutely necessary, of canceling their ill effects as much as possible.
Why should that be prohibited?
But it can't very well be enjoined either, at least not by the civil law, since the civil law holds only within the boundaries of the state, and what is wanted is precisely something that crosses these. So it can only be an opus supererogatum, a work of,
Supererogation.
Thank you. That the wisest and best of every state freely undertake this task beyond the call of duty can only be wished for.
However ardent, it must remain merely a wish.
I believe so. May there be men in every state who are beyond popular prejudice and who know exactly when patriotism ceases to be virtuous.
I join you in your wish.
May every state contain men who are not the creatures of the prejudices of the religion that they were raised in, who do not believe that everything in which they regard as good and true must be good and true.
May it be so.
May every state contain men who are not dazzled by high position and not put off by low, men in whose company the nobleman gladly stoops and the lowly confidently rise.
May it be so.
What if this wish of ours were fulfilled?
Fulfilled? To be sure, here and there, a man like that might turn up.
I don't mean just here and there, and there and now and then.
In certain epochs, in certain religions, there might even be several such men.
What would you say if I told you that today men like that exist everywhere? From now on, there are always going to be such men.
Please, God.
What if I told you, further, that they do not live ineffectually dispersed like the church invisible?
Happy dream.
I'll get right to the point. These men that we're speaking of are the Freemasons.
What's that you're saying?
That the Freemasons may be these very men who have taken on the job of reestablishing human solidarity, including this in their proper business.
The Freemasons?
Yes, I'm saying they counted as part of their business.
The Masons.
I beg your pardon. I forgot that you don't want to hear about them. Look, we're being called for breakfast. Let's go.
Wait a minute. You say the Freemasons?
Our conversation brought me back to them against my will. I do apologize. We're bound to find more deserving matter for conversations once we join the breakfast crowd. Come. And scene. Second scene.
Starting to get better. Flirtatious.
Okay, the third conversation happens a little bit later in the day.
All day long, you have been avoiding me in the crowd, but I've talked you down to your bedroom. Oh, that's odd.
Do you have something important to say to me? I'm too tired for a mere chat.
You're ridiculing my curiosity.
Curiosity?
Yes, which you so artfully piqued this morning.
What were we talking about this morning?
The Freemasons.
Well, what about them? I hope I didn't give the secret away when I was tipsy on Piermont mineral water.
The secret which you say no one can give away.
Oh, all right. That restores my peace of mind.
You said something about the Freemasons that came unexpected. Struck me. Made me think.
What was that?
Come on, stop teasing me. I'm sure you remember.
Now that you mention it, it does come back to me. That's why you were so absent-minded with your men and women friends all day today.
Right. I won't be able to go to sleep until you've answered at least one question of mine.
The question?
How can you prove or at least support your claim that the Freemasons have these great and worthy aims?
Did I speak to you of their aims? I was not aware of it. You were quite at a loss when I asked what might be the Masons' true deeds. I wanted to draw your attention to something that deserves to be worked at, something that doesn't figure into the dreams of our clever political theories. Perhaps the Masons are working on it. Perhaps they're working in that vicinity. I merely wanted to cure you of the prejudice that every spot fit for building has been identified and occupied, and that all construction work has been duly meted out.
Wiggle as you please. From your speeches, I conclude that the Freemasons are people who have freely chosen the responsibility of working against the unavoidable evils of the state.
Such a conception of their undertaking will at least not dishonor them. Hold on to it, but understand it right. Do not include things that don't belong. We're talking about the unavoidable evils of the state, of any state, not about the evils that go about with this or that particular state of a given constitution. The healing and alleviating of evils native to a particular state the Freemason leaves to its citizens, who must venture and risk themselves according to their citizen insight and courage. Evils of a quite different, higher kind are the object of the Mason's efforts.
I understand. Without the evils that concern the Mason, there could be no happy citizens. These are not the evils that cause citizen unhappiness.
Right. The Freemasons mean to, how did you put it? Work against the unavoidable evils.
Yes.
Work against might be too strong a word if it is understood to mean undo them. These evils cannot be undone. It would destroy the state. They should not even be made apparent now to those who do not yet know how to perceive them as evils. At the most, they can be mitigated by distantly stirring up this perception in people, by allowing it to germinate and send out shoots, by clearing away weeds and thinning out the new plants. Now, do you understand why I said whether or not Freemasons have always been at work, centuries may pass before one could say, this is what they wrought?
Yes. And now I also understand the second part of the riddle. Good deeds are to make good deeds superfluous.
Fine. Go then and study these evils. Get to know them all. Weigh their mutual influences. This study will reveal things to you which in days of dejection will seem irrefutable arguments against providence and virtue. But this discovery, this illumination will give you peace and make you happy, even without being called a Freemason.
You say the words being called with so much emphasis.
Because one might be something without being called it.
All right, I understand. But to return to my question, which I need only rephrase, since I now know the evils which Freemasonry combats...
You know them?
Didn't you enumerate them for me?
I merely named a few of them by way of test, just those which are obvious to even the most nearsighted, just a few of the most uncontested and most comprehensive. But there are many such evils less obvious, more debatable, and less comprehensive that are just as sure and inevitable.
I limit my question to the evils you yourself named. Prove to me that the Freemasons have these in mind. You're silent. Are you thinking?
Not about how to answer your question, but why do you want to know?
Will you answer my question if I answer yours?
Yes, I promise.
I asked for evidence that the Freemasons think as you say they do, because I know and fear your ingenuity.
My ingenuity?
Yes. I'm afraid you're selling me your own speculations for fact.
Thanks a lot.
Did I insult you?
I suppose I ought to be grateful that you call ingenuity what might have been given a different name.
No. Only I know how easily a clever person deceives himself, how readily he attributes plans and intentions which they never thought of to others.
But how do we infer that people have certain plans and intentions? Don't we reason these from their several deeds?
How else? Which brings me back to my question. From what individual, uncontested deeds done by Freemasons can it be inferred that in and by their fellowship they mean to overcome the divisions among men of which you spoke? The unavoidable divisions within the state and amongst states. Show me that this is even one of their objectives.
And that they mean to do this without threatening the individual state or the continued existence of a plurality of states.
I'm glad to hear it. Look, I'm not necessarily asking you to tell me of deeds, oddities, in idiosyncrasies that spring from or lead to union among men would serve. You must have based your speculations on some such signs as I am asking for if your system is a hypothesis.
You continue to be suspicious of me, but perhaps you'll doubt me less if I cite a constitutional principle of Freemasonry for you.
Which?
A principle that they have never kept secret, and in accord with which they always have conducted themselves before the world's eyes.
To wit?
To accept into their ranks any worthy man, fit of character, without distinction of fatherland, religion, or civil condition.
Really?
Admittedly, such a constitutional principle seems to presuppose men who already make light of national, religious, and social distinctions. The constitutional principle itself does not raise up such men, but mustn't there be nitrogen in the air for saltpeter to accumulate upon the walls?
Yes.
And may the Freemasons not have been resorting to a familiar ruse that of openly practicing some of their secret objectives so as to mislead such men as driven by suspicion are always on the lookout for something different from what stares them in the face?
Perhaps.
Why shouldn't the artisan who can make silver deal in silver scrap in order to allay the suspicion that he knows how to make it?
Why not?
Ernst, are you listening? You sound as though you were half asleep.
No, friend. But I've had enough. Enough for tonight. Tomorrow, very early, I'm going back to town.
Already? Why so soon?
You know me and ask? How long will it be before you wind up your mineral water cure?
I only started it the day before yesterday.
Then I shall see you before you have finished yours. Farewell, good night.
Good night. Farewell. Okay. Here's the thing. Let's stop here and like discuss what we've done in
Yeah.
the dialogue, and then next show we'll continue. We'll do the other two.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
So what did you think?
It's fun. It's really interesting because what this is that an easy setup, and what I think is hilarious about it is that this is not so different, except for the language, obviously, but not so different from talking to a non-Mason about what Masonry is and what are its objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like this is a conversation that now, I mean, clearly has been going on for 200 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because yeah. You say they do things. Yeah. You're all great. What do you do? What do you do? What's a Mason do? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you heard that? Well, that's what they say when, oh, you speak of these deeds. What deeds? So I think it's incredibly interesting, and I also think it's incredibly interesting that literally right away in the first conversation that Falk basically just says, listen, there's no snappy answer. There's no elevator speech I can give you. There's none of that. It's too big. There's too much to it to simplify it down into a bite-sized portion that I can just give you quickly. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, what I found really interesting about it is that, clearly, the Masons do things. And it's funny. I was having another Facebook disagreement, as I am wont to do. I know.
No.
I have to just get rid of it. I swear to God.
Yeah, you really do.
So someone had talked about this had come out. It was in response to an article. I guess the Ohio State Legislature allows students.
Oh, right.
You've heard of this, right? So
Yeah.
basically, what maybe you can explain it better. It's like,
okay. So the Ohio State Legislature, was it the legislature or was it their Supreme Court that basically said, listen, if a student in a public school answers a question,
a science question,
using their religious beliefs as the answer, right? Is there evolution? No. The Earth is 3,000 years old. That's not wrong. They cannot mark them wrong. They cannot downgrade them for that. They have to accept that is the student's belief.
Right. Which, everybody who was posting that was sort of posting it in horrified language because it,
right.
And the argument
as,
really
as
goes,
well they should.
As well they should. It's science. Like, it's sort of like, it's sort of like if you're taking a course in religion and you say, well, there is no God, like that's
right.
It's just as bad, right? Like one's one subject and one's another subject.
And also that's a slippery slope of belief. And so now all I have to do is, again, this is why the flying spaghetti monster exists, is because of crap like this.
Yeah.
Is say, well, I believe in the flying spaghetti monster, and it's my dearly, nearly held belief that the flying spaghetti monster is above me, and and now I get to basically make up answers to tests, and you've got to give me an A, and I can get into Harvard.
Right.
Stupid. That's just stupid.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it undermines education.
So I quipped. Well,
right.
Remember when Masons used to stand up for,
sure.
public education?
Sure.
Public accessible education. Mm-hmm. And
although the funny part is that it was for a totally different reason. You know that, right?
No.
So, all right. So no, you're absolutely right. So especially in the 30s, 1930s, Freemasons in the United States were absolutely bonkers bananas for free public education. And they went out and they pushed hard for it and they lobbied hard for it. What it turns out they were lobbying against as much as for. What they were for was free secular education.
Yeah.
But what they were against behind the scenes, what they were against were the Catholics, because the Catholics had set up schools everywhere. And the Catholics were starting to churn out all of these kids who had gone through Catholic schools, and they were indoctrinated. They were, and so they were to counter the Popists. They had to get free public education.
Right. Well, and so actually,
so it's kind of funny that it's while it's a great thing, it's also just a little racist.
Well, not really. I mean, so if you go back, actually, Masons had been doing this long before, and I have a really good book, and I have to find it. I was not able to locate it, but I'm gonna find it. But
the Catholics have been good at setting up schools for a really long time.
Well, it's not just that. It's when you have to go back even farther, even before there was the first Grand Lodge, right? When lodges were just lodges, it was like in the mid 1600s. If you wanted to get a college degree in England, right? The terms of your bachelor's degree, you had to swear allegiance to the Anglican Church.
Yeah.
Or you could not get
because they ran the church. They ran the church.
They ran the church.
Excuse me. They ran the church ran the institutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it went.
So
for a long time, education was the sole realm of religion.
Yeah. So if you were a well-to-do, upper middle class Huguenot or Lutheran or Presbyterian or whatever,
Huguenots. Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
You could not get a college education.
That's absolutely true.
You could not get a credential. So these guys who are connected with these lodges started up the first private educational institutions of higher learning so that they could send their sons and be educated.
Sure.
And that's how like, Harvard University is a perfect example of a school like, kind of made in that mold.
Didn't they start? Weren't they religious at first?
Yeah, they were. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
But it was, by that time, enough other colleges had been started that they didn't feel like they needed a royal charter.
Well, true. But I would argue, I would push that argument a little bit. You're on the right track. You've just chosen the wrong example. I would say actually Penn, University of Pennsylvania. Okay. They're actually the first true one. And Franklin did it because exactly what you're talking about. And Penn has literally zero religious affiliation.
Yeah, and then between the years of I think 1820 to 1850, Grand Lodges directly founded more than 88 colleges in over 11 states. So so when someone says, Masons did that, Freemasonry didn't. But the truth is that the Grand Lodges were doing this directly. They were funding this directly. So I would argue that Freemasonry, at least, Freemasonry in, Alabama, where they opened up, in Tennessee, where they opened up a Masonic college, in these places, the institution itself, took on that advocacy.
Sure.
And so like the argument, the question that was sort of on the table was, is this something that Masonry does, or is this something that Freemasons do? Right. And so, and I kind of, what this dialogue seems to suggest is that Freemasonry kind of exists sort of under the table, as it will, as sort of sub rosa, to connect men across these divides, across these religious and state divides and stuff like that. And that's the real work of Freemasonry.
Yeah. I'll buy that. And I think that what it also says is that don't go looking for the big grand gestures, the hospital, right? It talks about, they set up a hospital, which is hilarious that in 1780 they're talking about the Shriners. Um, but don't look at the big hospital as the big good deed. The big good deed that Freemasonry does is that little tiny incremental stuff that only adds up with big macro looks at things, right? It's the micro transactions that make the macro world go round. And that's, I thought, was really, really interesting, which was that the secret is we make one man a little bit better, and then he does that to everybody else. And now all of a sudden everyone's got, morality and ethics, and is doing the right thing. But you have to look at a much, much broader picture to see the effect of those little goods.
But those goods are transcend the sort of
absolutely
morals and morals and dogma, for lack of a better term.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Of any particular state, any particular religion, right?
Absolutely right.
Absolutely
right.
And so in doing so, right, in Mason sort of being Switzerland in that regard and sort of saying, well, it doesn't really matter. Because here's the thing, this, I don't know if we mentioned this dialogue was only pretty recently translated from German. Right. I mean, these are German guys, and Germany was still a collection of small kingdoms in the, at that time. Right. So what they're saying is that it's this sort of connective tissue, right? That does more because it starts to break down the cultural walls that stand between us. And so I would, the thing that's really interesting, and the reason it's sort of relevant to today is because, we've got so many divisions in our society today. Conservative versus liberal, and Islam versus Christianity, and
urban versus rural.
Country. Yeah, right. And I feel like one of the things that we're kind of struggling with is we're not paying attention to that enough, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I see where you're going with it, and I agree with that. And I think that to put a finer point on it is that even more so than it was then, but clearly is starting even back in the 1780s, is the individual was prime, right? I need to know who I am. What differentiates me, and so the idea of that, and they talk about states, religions, that kind of stuff. That narrows down, right? Your focus on who you are, and individuality, and personality, and that's just a collection of brands, right?
Yeah,
as we think about it today. And so you look at marketing. Marketing is all about, I need to divide. I necessarily have to divide you into these areas so that I can get to where I want to be.
Right.
But what Freemasonry is, and what this argument is saying, is that yes, the state, Germany versus France, right? That necessarily divides people because they have to have an identity. That's important to human beings. But what Freemasonry does is it says, fine, it's okay to have an identity, but let's not use an identity as a reason for violence or for ill will towards each other, because a greater identity that we all share is that of humanity. And that's really interesting to me, that they hit that in 17 freaking 80.
Yeah. And keep in mind that up until, have you ever read Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza?
I have, but only of the lightest waft.
Okay. Yeah. So the thing that's really interesting about Spinoza, Spinoza wrote in like the mid 1600s. He was really the first guy philosophically to start talking about things like the rights of the individual.
Right.
Like it didn't exist. It didn't exist in Western culture prior to that, right?
No.
Like you were part of a church, you were part of a, you were just part of this community, and you had duties that you had to do, and individual rights and things like that was just like what are you kidding me? What are you talking
Sure.
about? Right.
There's a by the way, this is a clever illustration of that. That's much more modern, but really funny. Um, a friend of ours, someone that you know, and I won't get too much because he'll be embarrassed by me retelling this story. But he was born in the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
and grew up there and became a member of the military, because that's what all men did in the Soviet Union. They all had to do military service. He did his, and after he was done, he went to the university, which was a big deal. He was educated as a maritime engineer. And when he was in his 20s, well into his 20s, was the first time, because in his engineering classes, maritime stuff, they have to teach you international maritime law. And so it was the first time that anybody had ever said to him, innocent until proven guilty. And he just lost everything. And he said, I will remember sitting in that classroom going, huh? Why? I mean, and he said, I've always had that Soviet in me and driven into me, which is, fine, the police took you. You probably didn't do what you took you for, but you did something to get their attention. And so it's just karma. You're getting what's due to you at some point.
Right.
And he said, you're guilty, period. They wouldn't come after you if they weren't. That's just it. That's how things are. And that's something that happened in the freaking 70s, the 1970s. Yeah. That was going on, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what you're talking about, is that before Spinoza started talking about this stuff, people just, they necessarily, the elite basically kept everybody else in the dark, and said, no, I matter. You, not so much. You're right. There to do. And then Spinoza said, no, human beings. Everyone has inalienable rights. They're individuals, and each is of God. And like that's a big deal. It's a huge deal, actually.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's fascinating to me.
And
just,
so
it really is.
And so what I see today, like when so I frequent the I shouldn't pick on Texas, but the Texas Freemasonry Facebook group.
The poor people of Texas. Just
I know. But I know. There are guys there who are just like, if you disagree with them, right? They'll be like, well, you're not my brother.
Wow.
Right?
Right.
You're clandestine. You must be like, and it's like, that is just telling me that among some of us at least, right? We're missing the forest for the trees. Right?
Well, and honestly, that's what Masonry is there to prevent. Right?
Yeah.
Because back in the 1780s, we have this disagreement over social media, and I will slap you with my glove and demand satisfaction. And then we go at 10 paces and see if we can lodge 1-inch lead balls into each other. Mm-hmm. That's that's the alternative. And it's funny because that's exactly what they're saying in these dialogues, which is, listen, without us, where are you at?
Yeah.
What are you doing? It's evil. It's evil out there. And it's inevitable. That evil is inevitable, which I think that's the other really interesting thing that this thing gets at, which is that absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Yeah.
And that Masonry works against that by trying to educate men to the universality of humanity. Really interesting. Mm-hmm. Really, really interesting. Here's the other thing that strikes me about this. It's not as opaque as most dialogues are, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I loved it, because it was so like, I'm like, wow, this could be an exchange in a social
absolutely.
Media,
sure.
In a Facebook group.
Right. There's not a ton to unpack in these. These are pretty right up front. They're telling you what it really means, you know? Whereas like some philosophy is very, it's very opaque. I mean, like I'm thinking of like like Berkeley, right? In Berkeley's, what is it? First Meditations. Is that what it was? Is that the book?
Yes.
First Meditations.
So,
yeah. Is just, I mean, it's a tiny, tiny little book that took me an entire semester of college to understand the first little bit of. And I still don't. I still have problems with it because it's just mind-blowingly dense.
mm-hmm.
And you really have to chew on every sentence means something and what's going on and what's the, you know, where are you pulling and pushing with the philosophy. This is right, pops you in the face and goes, no, this is what I'm talking about right here.
Yeah.
Now, here's an interesting question about that though. Is that a result of our modern perspective, right? In 1780, would this be a little bit more dense? So someone have to go, I don't know about that. You know, I got to take that back and chew on it.
I don't know, but there's one thing that they, you know, in 1780 they didn't really have this because they didn't really have this, which is, so now you go into these Masonic groups, right? And there's huge discussions about, is this group clandestine or is that group clandestine? Is this, right, a Grand Orient? Are they actually Freemasons or are they not Freemasons?
Right.
And those kinds of discussions, I mean, look, if you're the member, and I think that, Ernst Falk made this case, like if you're the member of a state, great, be a member of the state, be a Frenchman, right. But your Frenchness does not abrogate the Germanness of a German or the Englishness of an English, right? Yeah. It doesn't make them worthless. It doesn't make them
correct,
non-existent. It doesn't,
right. And vice versa. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And so I feel like sometimes and they didn't have this because Freemasonry hadn't really split up the way it did,
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, put it this way, in 1780, right about that time in England, the ancients and the moderns were, going mano a mano, right? So
they were
just starting to happen.
Absolutely.
Or Grand Orient of France had not, had not made anybody mad or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is are we regarding groups that we don't recognize in a healthy way if we're simply saying, oh, my Grand Lodge doesn't recognize your Masonic tradition, therefore you're not actually a Mason and you're not, and I think what these guys are saying is you don't have to be a Mason to be a Mason. You don't have to be a member of a Grand Lodge to do this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that was another kind of takeaway that I had from this is that maybe we're spending a little too much time and energy, worrying about who is and isn't kosher.
And now that's a really interesting thought. And here, and that's a radical thought. I mean, to be honest, right?
Yeah,
that's a radical thought.
I'm not saying that we should recognize women tomorrow and we should, kiss and make up with the French.
100%. But it brings up a really good point. Why does recognition matter? Who does it benefit? What does recognition, what does that process, who does that benefit? Does it benefit every Mason? Are we all better because of the recognition process as meted out by the Conference of Grand Masters and the World Conference of Grand Masters? Do you know what I'm saying? Have we all been? Have we been protected? Have we been?
I would say it does. I would.
Yeah,
I'd love to say.
That's why I'm
I'd love
the
to say
question.
no. I'd love to say it doesn't benefit anybody, but I think it does. And the reason I think it does is because, like religion, it becomes or politics, right? It becomes too easy to call something and it not be that thing. So, for example,
I agree.
Kim Jong-un is not fooling anybody that that North Korea is the Democratic Republic of North. There is nothing democratic about it, right?
Nor republic.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There is, like you can have a church like, that claims to be a church, but then, then you have something like, the People's Temple in Jonestown, right?
Absolutely.
Which is anything but
right.
religion,
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
No, I agree with that. And I think that it also necessarily works against, I mean, it should in its true form. It works to stamp out fraud, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, we'll give a good modern example. There are a lot of spurious little Grand Lodges, especially in the South, and especially around historically Black colleges and universities. It's like
we have a lot in Chicago too.
Yeah. And in Chicago, actually, isn't there? There's a bunch of them, a bunch of really weird ones that are connected to like Nation of Islam. Yeah. So like this, but what's interesting though, they're money making schemes. They're almost pyramid schemes, in a way. And so like those organizations exist as a business basically for the guy who says, "Hey, I'm the Grand Master. I got my charter and blah 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 and all this stuff," and they talk it up, but it's not real. It's just there to enrich them.
Right.
Hopefully,
but
the conference
on the other
Grand
hand,
Masters. Yeah, right.
But on the other hand, if you've got a group that is doing the work of Freemasonry, right, and they're not necessarily recognized or regular, are they still Freemasons, and are they still doing the work of Freemasonry?
Those are the hard questions.
It's a hard question, and I would say certainly. Yes. I would say when I was in undergrad, I had this. In fact, he was on the show, like on one of the early episodes of the show.
Yeah.
His name was Dirk Ficka, and he was he's the head of the Parliament of World Religions, which has been in Chicago since the Great Exposition in 1893 or whatever. And he was also my, I went to DePaul University, a good Catholic school, and had to take a religion course. It's part of the, part of the requirements. And so I took this comparative religions course, and he taught it. And one of the things he introduced me to was this idea of particularism, right? Which says that there are lots of different traditions out there, and none of them are necessarily valid or invalid, right? None of them are, like none is like, nobody holds the monopoly on truth, but this is the particular faith and tradition that I was raised in, and I'm most comfortable here. And so I'm going to do the work of connecting to the divine through this tradition, because this is my tradition. Right. It doesn't mean that someone who's a Zoroastrian is not worthy or not devout or not any, in other words, all the good things that religion brings us, right? It doesn't mean that someone who follows a different faith isn't really, a righteous person or a devout person, right? It just means that it's different. That's all.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of how I regard these other traditions, like, to the extent that they're actually doing the work, right, and not like a money-making scheme or something like that. To me, it's like, okay, there's a group of like adroit, humane guys that are, they want to.
Right. Now here's the interesting part, right? The interesting part about that, I think, is that you're saying this, and I think to myself, well, all right, fine, but then why can't we have visitation? And the answer to that question is because the Conference on Grand Masters, when they do this thing, when they say like, "Hey, listen, we have a group, we think about this. What is Masonry?" And we all come together to agree on a certain definition, and and that's to protect people from being scammed, things like that. The only thing that they have, the only carrot that they have is visitation, right? is that if we deem it good and we welcome you into our collective, hey, then we can all freely visit each other. That's the only benefit that they have, right? Anything else, there's nothing else. There's nothing else.
So
the
that's
visitation is it, right? But
So-
here's my thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that if you use that and say like, well, here's our definition, and you're trying to get rid of the fraudsters and things like that, you're going to have some slop there. And that's where it comes in with like Ledroit and things like that, where you're like, well, is it just not similar enough? There has to be, there is a line. They're not similar enough. And while we shouldn't say that's a crime, like that's not good, we still can't visit. We
Yeah,
right?
I look at it.
Does that make
I
sense
look at
to
it.
you?
Well, sort of.
It
I
feels
have a different.
it feels very real
different
world.
Yeah, I have a different perspective on it, and you're taking I think a more utilitarian position
Absolutely.
than I would, but
Very practical.
My position is like this: the practice of Masonry happens when you close the door.
Correct.
Right.
Mhm.
So once that door, once the master gavels and the door closes, right, everything that happens after that is how we practice Masonry.
Yeah, sure.
And to have somebody in the room who's not one of us is foundational to what we do, right? Because we have to we purge the lodge. We have
That's right. Yeah.
There are in the world of religion, there are practices that are reserved for only those people who are insiders. For example, right? For me as a Jew to go and sit in the back of the church on midnight mass and Christmas Eve, which I used to do, loved it, right? Is fine, right?
Yeah.
But I don't go out and take communion.
Correct.
Right? Because that would be a violation of
that's your step too far.
Right? Yeah. And if a there's nothing wrong with me inviting my Christian friends to my son's bar mitzvah, right? But they cannot go in the mikveh, right? Which is the ritual bath that is reserved only for Jews, right?
Yeah.
It's right. It's just, there's a point at which now what that means to me in the context of Masonry is like, yes, could I go and meet someone like a Heather Fulton or a Janet Wintermute or someone like that in a social situation at a
100%.
Conference, at
Absolutely.
a conference of Masonic scholarship?
Yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Right?
Sure.
No problem. But what happens when that door closes is what we do. And so if you're not part of our group and recognized as meeting the same standards, and here's the thing, I'm welcome. I'm welcome in an Orthodox Jewish community and a Reformed Jewish community and my own conservative thing. I'm welcome anywhere within that thing, right? Because it's all recognized, but I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't try to go to Mecca. You know what I mean?
Sure.
To go on to go on a Hajj.
Yeah.
Because I'm not part of that thing, right?
Correct.
So that's kind of how I look at it. I see that there's a philosophical reason for this, but I think the problem that we have is that we're spending so much time trying to it's almost like we're trying to build camaraderie by demonizing the other, and I think that's
there you go. Right.
That's unmasonic.
There you
to
go.
me.
No, I completely agree. It is in it by its definition unmasonic. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
So what we're gonna do, we'll pick this up. I think that there's dialogue 3 and 4, and that actually gets into some other issues with Freemasonry, which is big fun because it addresses some of the Grand Lodge and some of the issues that we're having today in terms of like how we practice Masonry and what we're doing and stuff like that. It's really good, and you won't want to miss it. Thank you to Mike Hambrick, Brad Parkinson, Bud Michaels, and Norbert, who's joined us live. We'll try to do this again next Sunday night. Keep an eye out we'll continue this really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And again, thank you to the support of our executive producers. You are the reason that this show happens. We've recently, and this is me. We have kind of a complicated workflow now that we're doing video. So sometimes it just takes a few hours to do all the post-production and get everything into the feed, but we are completely caught up now. We've got everything in the feed. I just have to make one little repair to episode 130. There's like I screwed up on the music. I'll fix that, re-upload it. And then we'll try to get back on a regular schedule. So thank you guys for joining us. Tune in next week. You won't want to miss part 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see you then.
Scintillating.
Fiat Vox, everybody.
Good night, everyone.